Привет from a chilly afternoon here just off the Baltic Sea, and that is emblematic of the relations between Europe and the US at the moment after that absolutely ridiculous scene yesterday in the Oval Office. Unless you've been living in Iraq, you understood what has happened. You've probably seen clips of it already, but basically there was an unprecedented, unseemly diplomatic spat played out before the TV cameras between J.D. Vance, the American Vice President, Donald Trump, the US President, and Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian President, which should never happen in public, even if those grievances get aired in very undiplomatic terms in private. It should not be taking place in front of the cameras. I've never seen anything like it. I don't know if you have. Please send me a clip of something that's comparable. It was shocking. Absolute circus, and didn't reflect well on any of the parties involved. However, ironically, it actually probably makes them all more popular, all three of them, with their respective constituencies, which is a bit of a paradox, but that's what we're going to get into a little bit in this video. So I think I should start by reminding everybody why they were even meeting each other in the Oval Office. So basically, Ukraine and US have negotiated a reconstruction fund agreement, which is basically an agreement to agree in the future about reconstructing Ukraine using funds that will be 50% controlled by the US and 50% controlled by Ukraine, that will come from new extraction of natural resources in Ukraine. I guess some of them could be rare earths, and that is how Donald Trump has labeled the agreement, that America is getting all this money back. He grossly exaggerates the figure all the time, how much the US has sent, how much they've helped Ukraine, and how much probably Ukraine has in resources that can be extracted profitably as well. But partly that may be because Zelensky has presented this as a way to tie in the US to Ukraine's long-term future. So who knows how many resources are really down there and how much it will cost to extract them and how long. But Zelensky went to Washington yesterday in principle to sign the agreement, and that had been negotiated. I took a look at it. I read it as a former lawyer, and I made a video. You can go check it out, although the whole thing is moot at this point after yesterday's shenanigans, because it's not been signed at the moment. It was never signed. But the reality is that Zelensky wanted to meet with Trump in person to impress on him the need for US security guarantees if there is going to be a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. At this point, Ukraine is very concerned about Russia restarting hostilities at a time when they're in a better position, because that has been the experience in the past. Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014 illegally, annexed Crimea, and took de facto control of parts of eastern Ukraine. And then obviously we had in 2022 the start of this extended invasion and attempt to basically snuff out Ukrainian independence from Moscow. So Ukraine is understandably very nervous about any pause and finding might help Russia going forward if there isn't any real security guarantee that they couldn't do something similar in the future. You have to think back to the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, where Ukraine gave up the world's third largest nuclear arsenal in exchange for security assurances. Now, in 2014, when Russia invaded Ukraine, first of all, Obama was the US president. They were signatory to the Budapest Memorandum along with Russia, and Obama didn't do very much, let's be frank about it. So the security assurance doesn't really mean anything. So what Ukraine wants is a security guarantee, which in reality means, and that's why Zelensky went to Washington, that the US provides a real deterrent to Russia ever attacking Ukraine in the future. Ukraine has agreed in broad terms that they could live with maybe Russia continue to occupy illegally some of the territory in the short term, that they would try to restore territorial integrity diplomatically in the future or at some later stage, and they would cease the hostilities, but they need to know for sure that Russia won't attack again. So one way is to build up the Ukrainian military, another way is nuclear weapons, but seeing as they're not likely to get nuclear weapons in the short term or medium term, then a US security guarantee would be what they believe will be a really effective deterrent. However, the US has ruled out putting boots on the ground, using nuclear weapons to defend Ukraine, And Donald Trump's strategy so far has been to say the Europeans are going to provide these security guarantees, but Ukraine doesn't really believe that that would be an effective deterrent. Only the US actually committing to defend Ukraine would actually deter a future Russian invasion if they were to cease the hostilities now and then possibly negotiate some sort of longer-term peace agreement. Vladimir Putin has violated just about every agreement that Russia signed or he personally signed. He made statements saying that Crimea was Ukrainian in the past, and now he just ignores all that. So it's not someone that you could realistically trust to keep his word unless there was actually something stopping him. So that is why it was there. And Donald Trump, from his point of view, has insisted on getting at least a ceasefire, not a peace agreement, very quickly. And that is not very realistic when you have this underlying situation where the war started because Russia wants to control Ukraine, doesn't accept that it can act independently and be independent of Moscow, and the Ukrainians don't want to be in Russia's sphere of influence and under Moscow's control anymore. And war is the continuation of politics by other means, as the von Clausewitz adage goes. And the situation on the ground is at an impasse, so neither side has won militarily to change those circumstances. And so Trump insisting on a very quick peace deal, or a pause in fighting at least, isn't realistic. These things are extremely complicated. It is not like doing a real estate deal. And Trump, for maybe his motivations are genuine, maybe he actually wants to stop the fighting, maybe he wants, just for his own reputation, to say that he brought peace, even if it's very ephemeral, that he wants it here and now, and he's trying to use his leverage by moving the US is not neutral, has not been neutral. They've been supplying weapons and financial support to Ukraine, but in the last few weeks he's moved the position of the United States way closer to the Russian positions, and as a result Russia's actually demanded way more. So that is how he's tried to position it and frame it, so that he believes that if he just gets Ukraine to basically agree and stop and threaten and to withdraw the support or weaken them, that then he'll have a situation where there's a pause in fighting. From Ukraine's point of view, that doesn't make much sense from the way they see it. They say, well, what's the point of having fought Russia to an impasse if then we just give in? And that is the background as to why we saw tensions boil over. It did look like it was not spontaneous. There was a lot of little digs going on, and Zelensky looked quite tense as well. And why was J.D. Vance even speaking? We got the US president with a Ukrainian president, and J.D. Vance seemed to be trying to get a reaction. He provoked Zelensky. Zelensky also, because English is his first language, to a certain extent, he also started to lose his cool, and his body language was quite negative throughout the altercation at this point. I mean, it was really, I thought it was going to turn into the Jerry Springer show, that they'd start throwing chairs at each other or throwing punches at one point. They were that openly hostile. It was completely unbecoming of, presidents and vice presidents at a press conference. So Zelensky, because of the seriousness and the gravitas of the situation, should have maintained his cool a lot better, but because of some misunderstandings, I think, with the language, he said things then allowed the situation to escalate. But it seemed to me that might have probably was the plan behind it, but of course I can't say that for sure. But it just seemed like there was, Trump even said himself that it was good that everybody saw it. How was it good? It was terrible. The whole thing was a nightmare from any objective point of view. And the fact that he allowed Vance to even speak like that to a foreign head of state is just like completely unacceptable, and it was very disrespectful, I thought personally. And Zelensky probably should have kept his cool a bit more, but at the same time he felt like he had to challenge Vance and Trump in a similar way to actually Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron had done earlier in the week with Trump, where they actually corrected him. Definitely Macron corrected him quite notably when Trump started going off with all these fantastical figures and misrepresenting what was going on. So everything escalated. Why has Trump come to the conclusion that his idea of getting peace very quickly is just not realistic, and he's decided to blame Zelensky and Ukraine, saying they don't want peace, which is ridiculous and outrageous. They just don't want to have a ceasefire and then find themselves that they're going to be destroyed and Ukraine is going to be crushed because the US doesn't and the Europeans don't provide any security, and Ukraine is then weakened as a result of having agreed to the ceasefire. Like, Ukraine really wants peace, but they want a long-term peace that's realistic. And there just simply isn't a way to do that quickly, realistically. And it seems like Trump has decided to blame Ukraine for this, and at the end the deal wasn't signed. And afterwards he doubled down in criticizing Zelensky, and already they're examining cutting off the aid. But I think this was all what they come to as a conclusion before. I don't think this is spontaneous. This is definitely not how foreign policy should be formulated, with these kind of emotions in the heat of the moment. And this is actually something that Ukraine was worried about even months ago, that inevitably when a quick solution is not found, they were hoping to persuade Donald Trump that it was Russia's fault, not Ukraine's fault, so that it might still get aid and even maybe get more aid as a result of Putin not agreeing to what potentially Trump would demand. But it's gone the opposite, and that is really, really bad news for everybody. I think it's bad news for the US, in spite of, because I looked at a lot of comments from MAGA influencers and also people I know in MAGA, and I spoke to them, and they think, yes, basically they're very positive about how Trump and Vance behaved. Also, having spoken to people in Ukraine, Zelensky is even more popular, it would seem, which is expected. You have this rally around the leader effect. This happened already when Trump called Zelensky a dictator, and then actually walked it back only 2 days ago and said he couldn't believe that he would have called Zelensky a dictator. But that made Zelensky even more popular, because he's seen as standing up for the country even firmer than before. And apparently this kind of what looked like to me just open bullying and belittling of a foreign leader that has been built up to be some sort of enemy or adversary of the United States in MAGA circles, that went down very well with them. So ironically, even though this thing is a complete disaster for the collective West and for the US and for Ukraine and for Europe, it's actually playing quite well with their representative bases. So you can see how personal interests can conflict with national interests quite clearly there. But let's be frank about it. This scene was disgraceful. The fact that that Donald Trump can think it's good that this plays out on TV is ridiculous. And who wins from it? Definitely Russia will be laughing. I would expect them to even increase their demands even more in the next week. But having seen that, it just looks like the collective West is complete disarray, that Putin was vindicated to continue with a disastrous war from Russia's point of view in terms of the amount of material people they've lost. Their economy is in such a poor position as a result. But by holding out for Donald Trump to become the US president, then look at that scene. You must be thinking, yeah, now they're going to abandon Ukraine, and we actually, from Russia's point of view, have a chance of winning now from this remarkably weak position, because they're just going to react like this in public even. We don't even need to get involved, just let them destroy themselves or weaken themselves. So really bad. From the European point of view, it confirms a lot of their suspicions that this administration just fundamentally isn't in sync with European interests on security. If they're willing to have this complete fiasco in public and talk down and beat down on a European leader, a wartime leader resisting against massive Russian aggression. It also undermines the credibility of Article 5. If they behave like this, is anyone really going to believe that the US is going to intervene if the Baltics here, I'm actually in the Baltics at the moment, if the Baltic states are invaded after yesterday? I don't think that looks very likely. Fortunately for right now, Russia doesn't have the capacity to invade immediately because they got so many troops tied up in Ukraine, but who knows in the future how that will change. So, and yeah, just overall, it's really an embarrassing situation for the US, and I would say for the collective West in general. So yeah, nothing to be optimistic about. I think maybe unexpectedly for most people, I think the really big winner in all this may turn out to be China, because China has been supplying a certain amount of assistance to Russia in this war. There's kind of been this axis of authoritarians that have been collaborating, but they're not really friends with Russia. They buy some, obviously, on the cheap Russian resources now that Russia finds it hard to sell those to Europe. But look at it from China's point of view. All those resources are in, a huge amount of those resources are in the far east of Russia. Russia can't defend those at the moment. They don't have the forces, that's clear. China were to intervene or start to undermine it. Europe is going to have to think about closer ties with China, or they may think about closer ties with China and partial pivot away from the US, since the US is so becoming increasingly hostile. If we throw in also the tariff threats and the territorial designs on Greenland, and even this morning there's talk of the US intervening unilaterally in Mexico. It's like mad. They've obviously have this diplomatic spat with Canada. So basically the US looks like a very unreliable ally, and then you're going to have to, it would be sensible to balance them, even though I'm not a huge fan of having to become closer to China, but maybe that's going to have to be the realpolitik approach. And yeah, we'll see what Ukraine does as well, whether they start to look for maybe balancing with China as well. That's a possibility. Definitely Turkey has become, in the last few days, a lot closer in its position with Ukraine as well. They see, obviously, looking at the balance of power with respect to Russia. So a lot of things are going to happen. It was, just to recap, once again, I was shocked by what I saw. I think that it is unacceptable that all this played out in public. It makes a joke of the word diplomacy. And yeah, it's quite a weird world that we're now living in to see this. And also it really questions the US's direction that it is becoming. If we take the UN vote where they voted with Russia and North Korea, even China abstained. It was back in the UN's resolution. It's just like a feeling of how countries feel about a particular situation. It's about the 3rd anniversary of the Russian invasion, 2022 invasion of Ukraine, and it was completely unexpected, and well, maybe not unexpected, but unprecedented. The US in that situation would vote against a resolution that was proposed by Ukraine condemning the aggression by Russia. So we definitely live in interesting times, and yeah, drop your comments down below. How you felt about it, how you think about my reaction, and how I've surmised things here for you, and what you think will happen in the coming weeks and days and months with both the Russo-Ukrainian war and America's position in the world. Are we now in a multipolar world, not because China and the other BRICS have risen relatively so quick, it's just the US is starting to fracture its relationship with its former allies in Europe, and what all that means for global politics. So I'll leave it there, and stay strong, Ukraine. I did make a video about 2 or 3 weeks ago saying that even if the US withdraws support, Ukraine still has a pathway to victory in this war. It will be a lot harder, it will go on a lot longer, and it will mean, sadly, a lot more people will die. But now we seem to be getting closer to that situation. So on that note, Slava Ukraini, do peremоги.